Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Out of Spec podcast. My name is Francie, and I am your humble podcast host today, your neighborhood EV enthusiast, bringing you another conversation all about electric vehicle infrastructure today. The installation of EV chargers is a crucial step in the expansion of EV infrastructure and to support growing EV adoption rates. However, once we put a charger into the ground, that's not the end of the story, as we know, especially if you charge and you have ever charged publicly with your electric vehicle. So understanding the responsibilities and the legal implications of ongoing maintenance and operations of EV chargers can help someone who's never going to be interested in being a site host understand more about the complexities of what it's like, as well as, of course, give potential site hosts or current site hosts ideas about how to better manage and approach these kind of agreements, because there's a lot to learn about the past that we've done with EV infrastructure and now in the present, take those lessons and not repeat our mistakes again. Today, my guest is Jason Goldfarb. He is an attorney at law specializing in EV infrastructure. It might sound familiar because he has been on the podcast before. We answered the question, why are there so many broken chargers in the ground? And he really helped paint a picture of what it was like from his awesome perspective of working in law and knowing about these agreements and contracts of what it was like when we were first rolling out this infrastructure, and kind of gave a picture of, okay, that's what happened there. Let's not do that again. Again, we're kind of following that similar theme, but really this time we are asking, from what we've learned from this industry so far, what are the major takeaways that we can look with 2020 hindsight and take into today's practices, today's contracts, so that site hosts and charge point operators, everyone involved in a charging station, can have the best agreements for them and have a more comprehensive point of view of what really matters when it comes to putting these chargers in the ground. So let's plug in for today's episode. I think you're really going to like it. This episode is made possible by the support we get from Fort Collins Kia. If you are in the market for any electric Kia, not only do they never add market adjustments, they will deliver your car to you anywhere in the 48 contiguous states for out-of-spec viewers. More information in the link in the show notes. A little bit about Jason, just in case y'all aren't, or Mr. Goldfarb, just in case y'all aren't familiar with him, definitely check out that other episode. We'll have the link in the show notes that we did many moons ago now. But Jason and his practice have clients from all over the EV industry. So both sides, or all sides really, because there's still so much to learn about what works in this industry. And he is embracing an open mind and perspective of all about learning that we can still make this optimal. We're not really quite there at making this industry 100% effective because it is such new technology. And we're learning also exactly how we should build these contracts out to make sure that the responsible parties for each moving part are being held up to that responsibility. The global EV charging market has grown tremendously over the past couple years. It's also gotten a whole lot better over the past year even of what it was before. I've gone on a lot of road trips lately, and EV infrastructure, EV chargers, they work generally for me. I mean, there's sometimes hiccups here and there, but it's way better than all of the horror stories that people were experiencing last year and years before. So that's really great. Additionally, we're getting more and more sites put up and larger stations with more charge points. So the numbers are just following the EV adoption rates. And of course, with the NEVI program, the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, there's federal regulation and state policies as well, but being put into place to push along this infrastructure. Again, the question that I'm focusing on today with Jason is, okay, when EV chargers are installed, what happens next? Who has what responsibility? How is that determined? How does it show itself in law and in contracts? And how does this affect the larger EV infrastructure bigger picture? What are the best practices? And one thing we didn't talk about, but something that I do want to keep in mind, and who knows, maybe we'll talk about in the future, is that there might be a perspective of companies in this space that have very different approaches to these contracts, especially if they're signing one with a site host or a site host partnership. There's companies who have been around in this industry for a long time, and they might be a little bit more stringent and non-flexible with the way that they approach these contracts. Like, nope, you're going to just have to, this is how we do it at this charge point operator or whatever it is. But there are newer companies that are coming into the US market that are coming in with their technology or whatever it is, who might be a little bit more flexible. So when those companies that are a little bit more stringent lose business, that business can go to these more flexible new parties that are coming into the industry and are more willing to say, yeah, okay, we can flex, we can learn here. And they might be more willing to learn, try new things, whereas the older companies want to do it a certain way because perhaps they've been burned. Jason does seem to think, and I do too, that thinking outside the box is key here. When it comes to newer companies coming into the US, there's a lot to learn, especially if they're coming in from Europe or Canada, about the US market, for sure. But that kind of flexibility can really lead to opportunities, not only to learn, but to embrace a different way of doing things, to realize, oh, that model might not be the perfect one for us. Let's try again. Whereas the ones who have been established in this space, they might just have one way that they want to go about things. We didn't get into that today, but if you'd be interested in us going into more topics, which we will, because Jason has a wealth of knowledge and he's just learning more with the more clients he takes on, we're going to go into that in the future. But today, like I said, I am going to be joined by Jason, and we're going to dive into basically what are the best practices when it comes to signing those contracts and being a site host or partnering with a site host as a charge point operator, whether you're selling the hardware or operating and maintaining it as well. So let's plug in with Jason right now. Hello, everyone. Yes, I am joined once again by Jason Goldfarb, an attorney specializing in EV infrastructure, because yes, those exist. And there's a lot to discuss on legal implications, responsibilities, and especially lessons learned from existing EV charging projects. So welcome, Jason, back to the Out of Spec podcast. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me back. This is fun. I'm looking forward to this. We had a great time the last time around, and I'm sure we're going to have a good time doing this one today as well.
Exactly. Me too. And I really like, sometimes in the EV space, we can talk about a lot of conceptual things, but you also can bring a lot of concrete examples from your work as well, which I think will be fun to be able to paint the picture of really how we can take lessons learned and see and move forward so that we don't repeat our mistakes. Because before we explored the question of why are there so many broken EV chargers in the ground, and you really helped kind of illuminate all of there were a lot of blind spots when we first were putting these into the ground. So I do recommend everyone to check out that episode with you beforehand. But now we're answering kind of a new question that could be almost summed up as, okay, what happens after the chargers are put into the ground, and how can we avoid repeating mistakes, and what best practices can be implemented moving forward from your point of view?
Right.
Yes. So are you ready to dive in?
Yeah, I'm ready to dive in.
Great. Okay. So maybe we can start with a broad question, but
okay.
Once an EV charger is set up, like, who is mainly responsible for keeping it running smoothly from a lot of the folks that you've worked with? Can you give us an idea of the typical agreements that are in place for this?
Yes. So the answer to that question is it depends. And what it depends on is the business terms and the contractual terms that the parties have agreed to. So in a typical scenario, most people that are looking to have this kind of infrastructure deployed on their property are not necessarily doing everything themselves, meaning they're in another kind of business. They're in the shopping center business, or they're in the parking garage business, or whatever the case may be. They don't, that's their expertise. They're real estate people, or they manage a warehouse. That's what they know how to do. That's what they know how to do well. For them to now start getting into the business of EV charging itself, it's not something that they necessarily want to spend a lot of time with. So if that's the perspective that they're coming into a project like this, it's really important that when they're sitting down and they're working with a company that's going to help them deploy that infrastructure, that they have a conversation about that. Who's going to be responsible for maintenance? Who's going to be responsible for upkeep? What's going to happen if somebody has a problem? Who do I call? How quickly will someone come and repair? Will you provide us with certain types of spare parts that maybe our on-site electrician might be able, to fix or to deal with? Or even if it's not something that our on-site person can deal with, if we have those spares, we don't have to wait days or weeks for the parts to come in. It's only a matter of getting somebody to come by and get the repair done. So the second part is that from a contractual basis, you're going to want to make sure that the contract for that deployment has things in that contract that make sure that the company that's responsible for doing all of this knows how that's supposed to work, and that you on the other end also know how that's supposed to work. The key there is that you want some clarity. It should be clear to everybody who's responsible for what, and that it should also be very clear as to what the requirements are for those responsibilities. Again, in the contract itself, is there going to be a number? How quickly are you supposed to respond? If you don't respond within that appropriate amount of time, does that rise to the level of, let's say, a default? I hate to go lawyer, but rise to a level of a default, meaning you've misbehaved according to the terms of the contract. And if it does rise to the level of a default, what are the consequences of that? If there are no consequences, then people will misbehave. If there are consequences, then odds are they're going to do the right thing. So really the important thing is, I would say, to sum that up, is really from two directions. One, have that conversation, ask those questions, because if you don't ask, you're never going to know. And then when they say to you, yes, we promise we'll have someone make a repair within 24 hours and we'll give you spare parts, you better make sure that that's somewhere in your contract. Because if you have that problem and they don't respond within 24 hours, or they didn't provide you with the spare parts, what's the first thing everybody always says? Let's go back and take a look at the contract. I'll give you a real world example of this, okay? It goes more onto the marketing side. But I had somebody reach out to me and tell me, hey, there's a shopping center that I manage, and my anchor tenant is a particular supermarket. That's my anchor tenant. But on all the EV chargers that have been deployed by the EV charging company, they have a screen. Some of the more sophisticated ones have these screens. They do advertising. The advertising revenue is another way to earn additional money from people coming up to charge. And guess who they advertise? They advertise a competitor to the anchor tenant in that shopping center. So the first question that I asked was, well, what does your contract say? And the answer I got back was, well, it doesn't say anything. I said, well, now you have a problem, because you have no language in there. You have nothing saying that you get to at least review or approve the advertising, or you didn't put anything in the contract that says you can put pretty much anybody in that you want, let's say, as long as they won't be offensive, or they won't directly compete with any of the tenants that are currently or in the shopping center right now. So you have no language there. There's literally nothing you can do about it. And they can continue to advertise the competitor to your anchor tenant, who I am sure is now angry at the landlord. Why are you allowing the EV company to advertise my competitors? They're annoyed. Now you've ruined the whole relationship with everybody. Everybody's aggravated. But there's a reason why everybody is aggravated.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that would be kind of a nightmare where you don't really have any control. And I can imagine that the complexity, as you're really saying here, increases depending on the location and the number of stakeholders involved. And it makes me wonder, okay, so it seems like you have to be pretty exhaustive with all of, not only going into the numbers of it, like how quickly do you have to respond? Like what are the repercussions if you don't? And there's also a question there of like, how much power do you really have to enact those repercussions if you're a smaller partner? So that's one question. But then also, did the templates we have for these kind of contracts, are they getting better? Is there a template, or is it really like case by case?
I would say from what I have seen in my practice, it's been a lot of case by case. I've seen some agreements that are not so good. I've seen some of them that where people have even admitted to me they are an amalgam of other contracts that they have seen from other people. If you're going to tell your lawyer to do that, thank you for being honest, but people should not do that. It's not a good place to pull those. And a lot of times people, because so much of this is so new, people don't realize that these are things that they should even be thinking about. It doesn't occur to them. And then the other thing also that happens a lot is that until you have this problem, you often don't know that it's something that you need to account for.
Mm-hmm.
So for us, what's been helpful is we've had people that have come to us and say, I've had this particular type of problem. Or in some of the conversations that I've been involved in online, I've seen that, or people have come to me and said, hey, how do I handle this? So I'm starting to see a lot of the problems that are coming up. And when clients come to us and they say, here, we need help with a contract and we need to clean it up, or we want to do something from scratch, we're already starting to put some of those things into some of the contracts that we're using, so that way our clients are appropriately protected. So it's very much a mixed bag. Everybody is using something different in a different type of a format. And the other thing is that in terms of the business and the legal structures, they're also all over the place. So almost every contract that we look at is different. I had a potential client that came to us. They were approached by 4 or 5 different EV charging companies who were interested in deploying that equipment across their portfolio in different places. And from each company, they got a completely different kind of a contract.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
that would be confusing.
It's definitely confusing. Yeah. Takes time for us to sort through. And especially if you're not an attorney and you get that, it's like, is something good? Is something bad? Is this what I can expect? People don't even know. They don't even know where to begin. And it's super confusing.
Yeah, with that kind of inconsistency from, whether you're being sold the hardware or they're trying to rent your spaces or whatever it is, definitely, that's when like you would come in where I would be like, I don't even know how to compare apples to apples here and what is important. Like you were saying, with all these complexities, is it how distinct are, I can imagine they're very distinct, but are most of the cases, I don't know what you would say, your clients or whatever, the projects, are they buying the hardware, or is it, I'm renting out these parking spaces and you're going to handle it?
So the answer to that also is different, and it also depends, because in some instances, so if you go back to the example of, let's say, a client that's buying all the equipment, and there are some people that decide they want to do it all for themselves because they want to be able to control it. They want to get whatever profit that might actually come from the charging equipment. They don't necessarily want to share the revenue, or perhaps they're technically savvy enough or sophisticated enough or familiar enough with the business where they're willing to do everything themselves. Even if there's a situation where you're willing to do everything yourself, you're now in a spot where you're doing everything a la carte. So let's use that example. I buy the equipment, I put it down on my property. Somebody has to be responsible for maintenance. I might want to do it myself, but if not, odds are you're going to have some kind of a maintenance contract with somebody who is an expert in that. Now you have a service level contract with a maintenance provider to maintain the equipment. Payment processing. You're going to need payment processing. You're going to need some kind of software. Now you're going to have to enter into an agreement with somebody to pay for the service of providing you with payment processing. There's now a software provider. There's now a payment processing provider. There's now a maintenance provider. There might even be a parts provider. There are companies right now that provide warranties on this equipment, which is almost like a form of insurance. It's pretty interesting, but there are companies that do something like that. And so now you have an agreement with those people. On top of that, you also have an agreement with your tenants in terms of what they can do and what you're going to charge them and how you're going to charge them and how you're going to bill them. So you're talking about multiple layers for something like that. So that's one way of doing it. If you do it all yourself, you have all these little subcontracts that you're dealing with. The benefit of going with somebody that's going to put the equipment in and take care of everything is that it takes you off your hands, and you pay, let's say, a small monthly fee that built into that covers all the other stuff that you would otherwise have to do. But that's a completely different kind of a contract than if you're on the ground and doing it yourself. By the way, if you're doing that, well, then you're also working with the survey company. You're also working with the contractor. You're also working directly with your utility company. You're doing all that work. There are companies out there that do project management just for these types of installations because there are so many layers to this. And they may partner up with EV charging companies to do this work. So it really runs the gamut.
It really does. I'm thinking about people trying to do this DIY, and it sounds
I would not recommend it.
No, it just sounds like a huge undertaking, and
Yes,
I wouldn't really recommend it either from my personal point of view. But
I wouldn't.
if you were just also trying, whether you were doing it DIY or just trying to understand things, from I'm not doing a DIY, but I want to know obviously what contracts I'm entering into. Are there any specific clauses that you think should stand out for property owners, one, but also on the other side for charge point operators that should be really look for this one first?
That's really sort of a little bit of a loaded question because there's so many layers there. What would you look for first? Well, number one, you want to make sure that, and this is not even a legal thing or a contractual thing, you want to make sure that the party that you're entering into this contract with is capable of doing all the things that you've been talking about that they're going to do. You want to make sure that they're financially viable. You want to make sure that they're for real. You want to make sure that the person that you're entering into the contract with has the authority of their business to sign that contract. Or even not only enter into the contract, but to sign on behalf of the entity. That brings you to the whole question of doing your due diligence. Who is the charging company that's come to you? What are they offering you? Have they done this in other places? Do they, share the revenue? Do they have a good reputation? Will they actually come and repair the equipment? When we did our first podcast and we were talking about why there was so many bad EV chargers out there, not to belabor the point, but if you're getting into a deal with a charging company that doesn't have such a good reputation, and what everybody knows of them is that when you drive by their stations, the screens flash and they never work, is that really somebody that you want to enter into a contract with? So I would say, number one, know your parties. And from the perspective of the charge point company, know who your property owner is. Make sure they actually own the property. Make sure that where you think is the ideal location for placing the equipment, you can actually put it where you want to put it. If you don't do your due diligence and you don't look at a legal description and you don't do a survey and you don't look at a title report, how do you know that the location that you've chosen to put your chargers into is someplace where you can go? Maybe there's a judgment against the property that would have an impact on your business there. Maybe there's a lien. Maybe there's a mortgage on the property that somehow or another has a restriction that would not allow the business structure that you've put together. Maybe the corner that you've picked to put the chargers into there's an easement there that somebody else has, what we would call an exclusive easement. Somebody else has the right to use that corner. You can't use that corner. Or maybe there's an access easement in that spot, and even if it's non-exclusive, meaning anybody can use it, well, now you've blocked the access easement. Now you've put them in default of another contract or agreement that they entered into. So before you even get to the point of haggling over the contract, not that it's not important, it's incredibly important, but you really have to do your homework and you have to do your due diligence. So I would say that would 100% be the first step. If you get past that point, and you know who the parties are, the person is authorized, you're good, you can put it where you want to put it, there's no restrictions, there's no zoning or permitting, like everything else is good, and now you're looking at the contract, you have to think about like what's most important to you. If you're entering into an agreement where you're going to be sharing revenue, I would say that's probably the first thing you want to look at. Did they put the terms into the contract that match up to the conversation that we had? If putting it in a particular spot is critical for the kind of service you want to provide to your clients and to your customers, did they actually indicate that it's going into the correct spot?
Mm-hmm.
Is that there? Did they promise that they would do repairs within 24 hours? Is that language in the contract? Is there a penalty if they don't? Like, so, everybody's going to have, I think, different things that are going to be really important to them based upon a particular project. And those would be the top things that once, assuming we get to the contract point, those would be the things that I would zoom in on to start with and to make sure that those things line up. Because if they don't, that's the first place where you want to start making changes. Because before you even get into, changing a comma and removing this word and adding something into a paragraph, you want to make sure that all the business and legal terms match up the way they're supposed to. And so that's the first thing you want to look for.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like researching your partner or this, entity that you're going to make this agreement with, and clear contractual language is essential to avoiding pitfalls, to being blindsided by anything, of course. And you mentioned revenue sharing, and I am curious, what's the typical kind of revenue sharing that you're seeing in these kind of agreements?
It kind of runs, again, it's a little all over the place depending upon who's offering it. Some companies are doing a pitch where they are sharing more, let's just say more of the revenue with their property owners as opposed to less. I've seen 50-50 splits. I've seen 60-40s. I've seen 70-30s. I've seen only 10%. But, that is somewhat a function of what's the rest of the deal like and what are the things that are most important to the parties. From a business and a contractual standpoint, you want to make sure that you're putting it together in a way that makes the most sense. Some people may not care so much about sharing the revenue because the main thing that they really want is they want to be able to provide 100% uptime, super reliable service to their tenants, and that's really all they care about. They may also feel like for the amount of money that I might be earning from the revenue share, it's really a pittance. It doesn't matter to me so much. But if I can bring in the right partner and the right company who's, yes, your half is you'll take the profit out of it, but my tenants and my customers will be happy and you'll be driving so much extra business to my property, they may not care about that as much. So that may not matter. In a situation where somebody is looking to maximize the amount of revenue that they're getting out of it, the question is, who is the one that wants to maximize the revenue? Is the charge point company trying to maximize it, or is the property owner? And if they both want to get the most amount of money out of it, now you're going to have this clash when it comes time to negotiating. How do you work that out and split it out?
Speaking of like issues and disputes and responsibilities, I have been turning my focus a lot to ADA and accessibility when it comes to EV sites, because I think a lot of them were originally put into place and they're not, ADA, they're not accessible.
I'm sure.
But what about, like, if I'm a site owner and someone puts in this amenity on my site and it's not ADA, but it's supposed to be ADA, where does that responsibility fall?
That's an excellent question. So that is definitely something that everybody needs to be cognizant of. I've written about it, spoken about it at other points in time. It's 100% something that you need to be paying attention to, because the ADA requirements are such that you have to have a certain amount of space around the charger equipment. It's got to be well lit. There has to be paths. You have to be able to open the doors, and in many cases, it has to be wheelchair accessible, and so on and so forth. And it depends where you're putting it and the kind of property that you're putting it into, but you have to be compliant. So for charges that were already put in, I have to say off the top of my head, and I don't know the answer to this, is to whether or not you'd be grandfathered in. I'm not sure. If I don't know something, I'll always tell you. I'm not going to pretend that I know the answer to that, but it's possible you might be grandfathered in certain locations and places where that might not be an issue. But let's say that you're not. And so you put a charger in, and now all of a sudden you realize, oh my goodness, we never complied with the ADA. How do we deal with this? I would again say, go back to your contract. What does your contract say? Does it say who's responsible? What happens if you have to make a change? What if the government comes in and requires that you now do something different with the infrastructure that you've put down in the ground, how is it going to work? In your typical infrastructure contract that you might see for, let's say, a billboard or a cell phone tower, you're going to have some language in there that's going to cover how you deal with what happens if we need to move stuff around. What happens if the government rules and regulations change and are now such that this location is no longer viable? Or what do we do in that situation? Do we fix it? If we fix it, at whose cost? Do we just bail and say, well, we can't continue to keep the equipment anywhere anymore because we can't remain compliant? So if you're not thinking about those things, and hypothetically, if you were a landlord that was thinking, wow, I really want to get the revenue from this location, and it turns out that you put it in the ground and it's not ADA compliant, and because of that, let's say the government is coming in saying, you better fix this or else, and the charging company doesn't want the pressure or the bad press, and they say, hey, this is not fixable. We had our contractors come out and take a look. We had our surveyor come out and take a look. Like, we can't, it's not fixable. We don't want to be fined. We're going to have to pull the equipment. So now there's all that extra expense. Now you have to pull the equipment. That's expensive. Somebody has to do that. And the property owner that was now expecting to have this amenity or the ability to earn this revenue is not getting it. And that, of course, brings you back full circle again to doing your due diligence, doing your homework, making sure that you do all that stuff. So for those people that have already put the stuff in the ground, it's going to be dependent upon what's in your contract. And I would say you need to have a conversation with the charge point company. Hey, how do we deal with this? Because we're going to run into a problem here. Let's figure out a way where we can solve this issue. And then you got to try and work it out so that way it works out well for everybody.
Yeah, okay. I think that's an interesting one. And I certainly hope that charge point operators, whoever is installing these, is taking it pretty seriously to install these with ADA accessibility. But, I would hate to be a site host who suddenly has folks who cannot use this amenity and certainly deserve to and have to deal with that headache. And another one is dealing with a charger that's down a lot for whatever reason. Like, you put this in, people can't use it. They're going to be mad at you. They are probably going to be mad at whoever's branded all over the charger, but it's probably going to come back to whoever's on site. So I know that you should definitely have the clauses on how quickly you can get it maintained. If you have any spare parts for your electrician who's on site, that's certainly important. But can you provide any examples of maybe a dispute you've encountered and how it was resolved when it came to maintenance and reliability, which of course are big buzzwords when it comes to EV infrastructure?
Yes. So maintenance and reliability. So I think probably one of the best examples of this is chargers in a hotel. So that goes exactly to your point. So think about a guest coming to a hotel and wants to be able to charge up, and they now have to go to the airport in the morning, and they're not fully charged because they went to visit relatives or whatever the case may be, and they decide now they need to charge up at night because clearly they can't bring it back empty. And now when they go to charge it, the charger doesn't work. And so it doesn't work. Okay, there's no number or anything on the front of the charger. They poke around on the screen. It doesn't tell them what they're supposed to do. It's just flashing. So what do? They go inside. They go to the front desk. And they speak to the person at the front desk. And the person at the front desk says, well, I don't know. You have to call the charging company. And they say, well, there's no phone number. Do you have the phone number? Well, let me look that up for you. They get them the phone number. They call. It's not the right number. It's not the right department. It's not the maintenance people. Yeah, you see where this is going, okay? And so when you have a situation like that, what ends up happening? I know of a story where somebody had this problem. They finally got in touch with somebody. And the somebody that they got in touch with, they said, well, the best that we can do is we can roll a truck. We'll try and fix it remotely. Sorry, after 10, 15 minutes, hey, we can't fix it remotely. We have to send a truck out for a part. Oh, well, how long will that take? Well, within 72 hours, we think we'll have somebody there. So if you have a guest there that now needs to get back to the airport tomorrow morning, they can't do that. Now they got to scramble around And hopefully, you know, it's in an app somewhere where they can easily find the next nearest charger. So you can bet that whatever they're doing, because now they got to spend all this extra time going around to find a a charger where they can charge up. Now it's charged up. Now they're annoyed at the charging company. They're annoyed at the hotel. They will tell all their friends, don't go to this hotel because their chargers don't work. And they will tell people, don't use the chargers from this charging company because their stuff sucks. And you had what could have otherwise been a very pleasant experience turned into a really bad one, and everybody loses from something like that. So, you know, in a situation like that, the thing is, I think everybody realized like this went bad. From what I understand is that the hotel then reached out to the charging company and said, hey, like, we need to fix this. They realized we don't have anything. Like, what do we do now? So, you know, I don't know how that story ended, but my guess is, assuming that the charging company wanted to maintain their relationship and still wanted the business, and that the hotel was concerned about their reputation and they had sufficient leverage with the charging company because more than likely they were using their equipment in more than one location, they probably worked something out where, you know what, from now on, if this happens, hey, we need a phone number. We need a dedicated person who's going to answer that call. And no, you really can't take more than 72 hours. And if this keeps happening, we're going to have a problem. That's the best that you can do. But if the charging company is not cooperative, or the hotel, let's say, is not cooperative on the other end, and contractually there's nothing that you can do to incentivize to behave nicely, you might end up in a situation where it's not going to end well. It's going to end badly because there's no recourse, there's nothing built into the contract. And if it really gets to the point where it's going to be a dispute, it's going to either come to me or it's going to come to a litigation attorney. And the first thing they're going to say is, show me a contract. So that, again, brings us back again to making sure that you put that in there. So I think the answer to your question is people are realizing they're making mistakes. And once these things start to happen to them, they start to get, a lot more careful about it. There's one other thing also you were asking, a specific thing, in a contract to look out for. One of the other things that I would say, besides all the other stuff we talked about, is what jurisdiction are you subject to? Meaning what state, whose rules apply in the event of a dispute. So let's go into the assumption that your contract is great. It's got all the things in it it's supposed to do. You did all your due diligence. You put all your stuff in the ground, whatever the case may be. But your location is in New Jersey. The company that put the equipment down is in New Jersey. Your business is located in New Jersey, but there's a subcontractor who got involved in this, and because of the subcontractor that the ChargePoint company is using, they require them to have all of their disputes subject to the laws of Nebraska. I'm just making up another state. So now you have a problem that you cannot solve because your contract didn't cover it, and now you have a genuine dispute. And what happens? You're either going to arbitration somewhere, or if you're not going to arbitration, you're now subject to the laws of a particular state. Now you're all subject to the laws of the state of Nebraska, but everybody is in New Jersey. That's probably not a good thing. You probably don't want that, but I have seen situations where clients have missed that. And then they have a problem, and now there's nothing they can do.
Okay, yeah, that I wouldn't think
that'd be another big one
to look at that. So why would that happen? Is it because the company's operating out of Nebraska or something? Why would?
So it could happen for a bunch of reasons. It could happen because somebody didn't pay attention. It could be somebody did pay attention and they said, well, we've never had a problem, so what do we care? And we don't want to get into a fight with them and argue with them about it. So what's the difference? We'll just leave it. And so that happens. So until you have a problem, you don't have a problem. And suddenly when you do, now how do you get yourself out of that? One of the things that I like to always tell clients is that it's worth it doing the grunt work ahead of time and spending money ahead of time, so that way you put yourself into a position if something bad does happen, you have a mechanism and a way in which to get out of it. You know what to expect, what rights and responsibilities are, because if you don't do these kinds of things and then you get into this problem, it is way more expensive to extricate yourself from that mess afterwards. Think about the example I gave you with, New Jersey and Nebraska. Well, Nebraska, I don't know what the rules are in Nebraska or in New Jersey. I was just using those two states, as an example. But if now suddenly you can't do what you need to do and you have no way of getting any kind of recourse because they can't possibly exercise their jurisdiction here, or if it says that any dispute is subject to that, well, guess where you're going? You're filing your lawsuit in Nebraska. You have to hire somebody who's licensed in Nebraska, and then you have to litigate it in Nebraska, and it may not be worth it.
Oof. Yeah, for sure.
Could be a mess.
It could be a mess. And I've even showed up, back to the hotel thing. I've showed up at a hotel that had either was on PlugShare or the hotel's website, but it listed that it had a charger, but it didn't. And I walk in and they're like, at the front desk, they're like, yeah, it says that online in some places, but it's not true. It's like, okay. But then to get there and it doesn't, that's one thing, that it doesn't even exist. But to get there and it doesn't work, it really does not only help to perpetuate the idea that like EV charging is not there for you, but these amenities aren't valued as they should be when they're called critical infrastructure, but then they're not treated as such for whatever reason, or they're not always working, whatever it is. But maintenance seems to be the maintenance protocol of
definitely an issue. So I'll give you an example of something that I experienced. So it's not related necessarily to electric vehicle infrastructure, but a couple of years ago I was traveling and in a foreign country, and they gave me a diesel. I figured, okay, drive a diesel. What's the difference? To fill up with diesel, no problem. There were diesel stations everywhere, whatever it is. This particular type of diesel and this particular car required a specific type of special additive called blue something or other that you had to pour into the car. So much like you had to put diesel into the car and you would have to pour oil into a car in order for the car to operate properly, you also had to put this additional supplement into the car in order for it to function properly. How do I know all of this stuff? Because I had no idea. I rented the car and I'm driving down the road one day, and all of a sudden I see this little light pop up on the screen, and I have no idea what it means. So now I have to fish through the owner's manual. Okay, I finally found it where it was in English, and it said, you need this additive. Okay, so the first thing I did is I called the rental company, and I said, it's telling me I need the additive. Which one of your rental locations in the city I'm in can I come to fill up the additive? And they said, oh, that's your responsibility. I'm like, wait a second. What do you mean that's my responsibility? They said, yeah, that's your responsibility. Just like you have to fuel up the car, you've got to put that in there. I said, so wait a minute. So like the car needs an oil change? That's my problem? That's your job. You're the rental company. You're supposed to be doing the maintenance. They said, no, that's considered a fuel. Okay, go argue with them. All right. I then spent several hours in the pouring rain driving around the city trying to find a gas station where I could finally get this special additive. I had no idea what it was. I had no idea how to get it into the car. I had no idea how much it was going to cost, but I knew that if I didn't find it, the car would eventually stop working. Okay. So there's an end to this story. So I finally find a gas station where they have the additive, and the guy says, oh yeah, they're over there in the cage. We can sell it to you. I said, how much is it? It was the equivalent of like $7 or $8. I said, great, I'll take a whole jug. So he gives me the jug. I go over to the car, and then I open up the place where you're supposed to put it in. And there's no way to get from the massive hole of the jug into the teeny hole that's in the car. For the thing, you can only do it with a funnel. So I don't have a funnel. I look in the car, there's no funnel. I go to the gas station and I said, well, I need a funnel. They said, well, we don't have any funnels. I said, well, you just sold me the additive. Like, how am I supposed to put the additive into the car if I don't have a funnel? The guy says, let me go in the back. Let me see if I can find it. He finds a funnel. He comes out. He gives me the funnel. And now, mind you, it's pouring rain. The wind is blowing. It's starting to hail. Okay, I've now wasted hours of my day where I was supposed to be doing other things with my family because now I got to find this stupid additive because I can't get in the car to go anywhere unless I find it. So I finally do it. It spills all over the place. I'm drenched. It's all over my clothing. It's all over everything. And I figured this problem is solved. The light finally goes off. End of story. On the way home, back to the airport, the light goes on again. that I need the additive. Mind you, I just filled it up with gallons of the additive, and the car shuts down and it stops working.
What? What
So,
on earth?
yes. So the reason why I'm telling you this story is this is the kind of thing where you have somebody on the other side who is maybe technically responsible for doing this. The rental company should have said to me, in order to keep me happy as a customer, no, customer, we don't want you driving around for 5 hours in a rain and windstorm to find this additive and to ruin your day. Come to us, we'll take care of this for you, we'll do it. That's a company that doesn't care so much about their customer service. So the reason why I'm bringing this entire story to you is this goes back to the original question that you asked me. What's the first thing you should care about? Who are you partnering up with? What kind of customer service are they providing? What kind of experience are their customers getting? Because if you're working with a company that really cares about something like this, in a million years, they would never allow something like this to happen. The first thing that would have happened immediately is the rental company would have said, sure, no problem, Mr. Goldfarb, come on down. We're right here. We'll give you the thing. We'll fill it up. Or bring the car back to us and we'll give you another car. So this way you don't have to deal with it. But they didn't do any of those things. They try to say, no, that's not our problem. It's your problem. And you think for a minute, if you're dealing with something that could be expensive or a pain in the you-know-what, or somebody is not trained for, or frankly, something that they don't want to deal with, and they don't have a contractual obligation to take care of it, do you think that they will? Certainly, if they don't care about their reputation or about the level of customer service they're providing, I don't think that they will. So that goes back to all the stuff that we've been talking about. It's like, these things really do matter. They really do make a difference. You want the person that came into Francie, when you came into that hotel, you should have had a good experience with that. There should have been a charger there. And if the hotel knows that, well, then who did they reach out to work with to get one there? Or did they reach out to the company that says there is a charger there and say, hey, you got to remove this because people are coming here and it's affecting our reputation. Get rid of it.
Exactly. Yeah. It seems like it should be very important, but it does. Yeah, it does point to make sure who you're partnering with, like, isn't just the cheapest equipment. Like a lot of people could just offer equipment to you and services, but like, what is their reputation? How well known are they? Like, look at other sites that they've put in and see what that experience is like. Like, do your research. I mean, arguably, maybe it should be easier than that, but I guess you should always be doing your research on who you're partnering with in a way.
Yeah, and if they give you a great pitch and you think it sounds great, then you know what? Find out from other people that they've worked with. It's pretty easy to find out where their other charging stations are. Ask those people what the experience was, and if they give you that really amazing pitch, and then you get a contract, and none of that stuff's in there, well then back it up.
Red flag.
How do I know? How do I know that? Oh, don't worry, it's no problem. Yeah, we have a great reputation. We would never do this to you. Okay. Then if that's the case, put it in here.
I have some questions for you about standardization and interoperability. Of course, neither of us are really in charge of writing the standards or anything in this industry, but it is pretty crucial to get standardization. Yes. We're working on it. It's coming along. But also there's the adoption going from the CCS1 connector to more and more of the North American charging standard.
More than that.
3400. Yeah, exactly. So that is interoperability. Maybe if I'm a site host, I want to either make sure these get retrofitted, or that if I'm going to put it in the future, that I have the most interoperability possible. But standardization is basically just a key factor in achieving a seamless charging experience for users. So how have you seen NACS come into the conversation now as automakers are planning to adopt it and charging stations and charge point operators are incorporating it into their hardware and their networks?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I have. It doesn't come up so much in terms of the work directly that I'm doing, but it is something that companies and clients and people out there with EVs are actually concerned about it. It does make a difference to them. So at the beginning, we had really more of a mess because everybody was using something else. And over time, what really happened, without really any intervention, but by virtue of the market just doing its thing, you started to see more and more of a standard, and more companies started to adopt the NACS standard. And Tesla was really in a position to drive that, no pun intended, because they up until pretty recently, and still have most of the EVs on the road in the United States are mostly Teslas. And because of that, that's kind of, become kind of like the standard. So more and more automakers want to be able to do that because Tesla also happens to have the best and the most reliable network. I'm not saying anything that I think most other people don't agree with. And because of that, they want to be able to tap into that. We won't even get into the discussion of how they make those arrangements and agreements with Tesla and how they have to pay and what those contracts cover. But the bottom line there is that they want to make it an easier experience for the owners of their vehicles, so that way they can pretty much charge up wherever they go. Up until recently, there were still a couple of holdouts from the auto manufacturing standpoint. I think Stellantis was a holdout. I'm trying to remember, there was somebody else that was still a holdout, and they were saying they weren't, and then they finally said they will. Their companies are now starting to provide adapters. So with some of the cars, even if you don't have the NACS, they're providing adapters. Somebody that I know has a Polestar. Polestar doesn't use NACS yet, but I read online recently that they are planning to do that, and their software is not ready for it, but they're working on an update, which is supposed to be ready at the end of the summer. So for their older cars, they're going to update the software over the air. Then presumably, if they didn't give you an adapter, then they're going to give you an adapter. So that way everyone can do that. I think the standard really does help because it just makes the entire experience easier for everybody. The parallel to this, and I have to use this example because it's really perfect, is if you think about the wireless telecom industry. I always come back to that because that's really how I got my start. But in the whole world of infrastructure. But if you go back to that, when cell phones first came out, everybody had a different network. There was all sorts of different equipment. There wasn't so much compatibility. If your phones only worked, with AT&T, for the most part, that's really all they were going to work. And then all the rules started to change. Admittedly, the federal government got involved in this and started to push for some level of standardization. And now you can travel with your cell phone literally to anywhere else in the world. Forget about, down a roadway or a highway or from, location to location, and your phone just works. It works on whatever network or whatever provider you have a contract with. If it needs to go on somebody else's, it'll go on. You'll roam and you'll pop on, to somebody else's network, and the equipment just works. Every cell phone that you can think of gets charged up pretty much the same way. You plug it into a standard 120 volt outlet. Yeah, you might be using, magnetic charging, or you might be using a USB or a USB-C or whatever, but the bottom line is you're plugging it into a regular outlet wherever you find one, and that's how you charge up. So that level of ubiquity has done amazing things for the wireless industry. And I think that if you can get to that same level of ubiquity with the EV world, it's going to make things a whole heck of a lot better, because then it won't matter where you charge up. My friend with the Polestar right now really has to plan long distance trips, because even though there are Tesla superchargers along the way of some of the routes he's had to go, he can't go to those places yet. He's got to find a charger from another manufacturer where he can plug in. So that's a little bit more of an inconvenience. So I think as we see more standardization, and it becomes more convenient, people will complain less, and it will start to become more and more acceptable.
Yeah, that's a goal too here with like taking these lessons learned and incorporating it into the contracts, is that it will become less difficult for people because the folks putting it in and working together are thinking ahead to make it work, so that it doesn't have to run into issues that it doesn't have to run into, that we can really avoid these things. You're not the only person as well. And I know we talked about this on the last podcast, but who has come from the telecoms industry and has come into the EV industry in one way or another. And I've heard a couple different ideas of like the lessons learned that we can really take from that. But if you could kind of surmise that of the biggest lessons learned from the telecom community industry and bring it here, what would those be?
I would say that probably two of the things are things that we spoke about. One would be the level of due diligence that's required before you get into any one of these transactions, is really knowing who your parties are and doing your homework. You don't really see it anymore, but 20 plus years ago in the wireless telecom industry, there really was an issue with companies not doing their homework and not knowing who they were getting into their contracts with, and not checking out the that they were signing on to deals with, or making sure the people signing their contracts could do it, or doing their due diligence, or doing the surveys and being careful about where they were putting their equipment down. There have been examples of cell phone companies putting towers down, and then they discover they're on the wrong property, or they put it on the right property, but it was somewhere where it really wasn't supposed to go because somebody else had an easement. Or they entered into a contract with somebody and they thought that the property was owned by John Smith when really it was owned by an LLC, but now their contract is with John Smith. And now when they have a dispute, what do? There's who do you go, like, who do you even go after to try and get that resolved? I mean, some of those things ultimately got resolved, but you're talking about very expensive, litigation, and sites that had to be taken down or moved, or money that had to be paid. So people were not careful about those things. And at the beginning of this industry, as stuff started to roll out, we started to see, and are still seeing, unfortunately, still a lot of that where people are not being so careful. So I think that's definitely a lesson learned. And I think if more people would pay attention to that, we'd be running into fewer problems of why there are so many bad chargers besides the basic contractual things. But, they will be getting put in the appropriate places to start with. You would know, who your parties are, so that way if there is a problem, you have some recourse. The other thing is also the level of interoperability and standards is something that took a lot of time for that to happen. And I think that's had an enormous impact on the cell phone industry, to the point now where almost everybody in America's got one. Some people have more than one phone, right?
True.
We all know those people. My wife has one. She has one for work. She has one personally. I used to have, more than one. So they're ubiquitous. They're everywhere, and you plug them in. They just work. It doesn't matter whose network you're on, and so on and so forth. With the EV industry, it'll be a little bit different, because right now you're at the point in the telecom industry where there's really only, a handful of companies left. And they all basically charge about the same thing for the service that they provide. But today, we're still seeing a very wide range. That's something that people have complained to me about. Well, why is this station charging 15 cents a kilowatt and these people are charging 90 cents? Well, that's ridiculous. Why would I go to the one that's charging 90? So, there's more of that. But I think the market is going to sort that out, because the company that's charging 90 cents, if there's a competitor down the block that's charging 15, well, guess what? People will be slightly inconvenienced and will wait online at the one for 15. They're not coming to you to pay 90. So you'll start to see less of that, but that's going to take time for all of that to be sorted out.
Yeah, certainly a lot of time. We talk about that a good bit because utilities also influences that. And there's going to be a lot of change and policy change as well that's going to affect that, which is kind of a good segue into something else I also want to cover with you, which is laws and policies. Of course, we're working within the structures that we have, but from what you've learned and looking ahead, do you see any notable changes in laws or policies that you think we need to help expand and improve public EV charging infrastructure to match EV adoption? Is it just about legislation, or are there other factors involved?
Well, I think it's a combination of two things. Number one, I think there's certainly the legislative piece, because the legislative piece is what incentivizes, for good or bad, but it is what incentivizes companies and businesses to do it, because they know they're legally obligated. For example, there are places now where it's going to be required. So as soon as people know that the charging infrastructure is going to be required and they're going to have to do something, so the legislation can push that. And that can be a double-edged sword. It's good in that the legislation is pushing it and it's promoting the deployment of publicly available EV charging infrastructure. But where it can be a double-edged sword is that if it imposes an unrealistic or an unfair economic burden on the people that are expected to deploy the equipment, or let's say they obligate you, just to give one good bad example, you must put in X number of chargers at a particular location by a certain amount of time. Now, that sounds great, but if it makes no practical sense to put X number of chargers in a location at a certain amount of time, or maybe only Y chargers can be installed because there isn't room for X. Or when we start to look at ADA compliance, now we can only put Y or X, but the law says we have to do X. That's now a problem. Or even though the legislation might push it and say, well, you need to get it done within 30 days. Again, I'm using an extreme example, but it takes 12 months to get a permit approved.
Yeah.
So that's, you have to use your head a little bit in terms of how the legislation can push it. So the legislation is good, and from a public policy standpoint, it's good. But it's got to be realistic. It's got to be done with the understanding that you can't make people do things that are not going to make economic or business sense for them. If you want something done in 30 days, well, you darn well better also be fast tracking the process for zoning and permit approval for this particular type of thing, so that way people can be in compliance, and so that way you're not forcing them into a situation where the moment that they now have to do this, they're suddenly running afoul of the law. So that's how policy can be done, and it's not always done exactly the way it's supposed to do. Think about what they did at the beginning. They incentivized people to grab land and just dump charges everywhere, and they paid them.
Right.
And then nobody had to maintain it or do anything else, and it didn't matter. People just got money for putting them in the ground, and so they all went in all the places they shouldn't have gone. Again, I'm not going to go back to our original podcast, but like that's what drove a lot of those problems. So that's I think where it can certainly have an impact. I think the other thing is that if the policy push comes with that, and it comes with a recognition that companies want to do this if it makes sense, and they want to do this if they can make money, and if you appropriately incentivize everyone to do this, and you build into that, yes, you're going to be required to have maintenance and upkeep requirements, and here's how we're going to do this, and this is what we'd consider to be reasonable, and this is what we expect. So, like, if they come at it from that direction, I think it can have a really, really positive impact. On the other hand, throwing money at this to encourage people to do this and make mistakes is a really negative thing. And in some instances, I think some of the people that deployed some of that infrastructure would have been better off, or at least the public would have been better off, if those companies had not taken the money and they had figured out where it actually makes sense to put one of these things. But the companies were under all this pressure to get it out there. So you had those two non-compatible forces pushing at the same time, and it resulted in a lot of mistakes. I think on the positive side, I think there's been a lot of recognition that a lot of mistakes have been made, and there are things that we can be doing right now that might solve some of those problems. Whether the politicians out there will actually do that, to do it smartly, I don't know. But I think people now really do understand, and I think they're getting more savvy about this, and they're recognizing it's okay. Well, that sounds great, Mr. Politician or Miss Politician, but how is this really going to work? What are you going to do to make sure that this actually works well for everybody?
Totally. They need to be in an EV and driving it around, and also charging it publicly, but talking to site hosts too, and going to these stations and being like, what?
Just understand the business, understand how this actually works. Recognize that charger in that location is really not needed. No one's going to use it. So why force somebody to put it there?
Yeah, why make the hard lines, the black and white, when we're still learning so much and really
we're still learning so much. Great point.
So much. I mean, yeah, truly, every day I feel like there are things that we're learning and unlearning about this industry and what works and what obviously has not worked. Are there any specific policies or legislative changes that are currently being discussed that you think will have a significant impact?
It's very hard to say, because right now, I would say a combination of two things. One, people are very unsure about the economy. And two, people are very unsure about where the election is going to go. And I think part of what is starting to happen is that people are not necessarily making some of these decisions right now because they don't know how everything is going to play out. I can tell you what I would like to see. I would like to see more of this legislative policy done in a way that really does make sense. People coming at this from the perspective of what can we do, what can we encourage that will make sense to the people that we are asking to do this? What
Mhm.
would the charge point companies want? Besides just, handing them money, like, are there certain things that would be helpful to them to be able to get this out there? I think people zoning and permitting, and if somebody came along and said, hey, we'll do that, that would help a lot, as opposed
Mhm.
to putting something into place that forces people to put the equipment in within a certain time frame, and everyone knows it can never happen. So, I think if we would start to see more things like that, I would feel more comfortable about, the government getting involved
Mhm.
in pushing it. If the government is getting involved and they're coming down by legislative fiat and saying you must do this, without any thought being given to how does it actually work in the real world. No,
Mhm.
I would say, like, get out of this and let private industry figure it out, because ultimately that's how they'll do it. The problem with that is that for private industry to do this alone, it's going to take more time, and that's not
Mhm.
necessarily a bad thing. But I think from a legislative standpoint, politically, we don't have much patience. We want to know. That's like everybody says, do something, get it done. It doesn't matter,
Mhm.
just do it. And so we do something without actually thinking sometimes about what some of the consequences might be. And so that doesn't necessarily work out the way it's supposed to. So there isn't
Mhm.
necessarily anything on the horizon that I've seen, but I know what kind of things I would like to see if there's going to be a continued push for this.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Like the mix of the private influence as well as the public policy coming together to make hopefully the best choices going forward. Not too high of pressure where we're going to totally miss the mark
Hmm.
and just like you said in the beginning, do those land grabs, whatever it is, but instead have this 2020 hindsight. So I feel like if we do break it down to the 2020 hindsight, obviously, do your due diligence, make
Hmm.
sure your contract has, I mean, everything you listed, like just really be exhaustive and making sure that all the scenarios are covered, consult an
Or at
expert.
least as many as you can think of, right? Because you
Yeah,
can't think of
I know
everything.
everything.
Yeah, it's
That's the
almost
thing.
impossible. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it'd be cool if, I mean, that's also why we're taking these lessons learned, but
Hmm.
also know like your situation from my point of view, like who's going to be coming there, utilization, a bit about the technology and your utilities as well. Like you have to do your homework, but when it comes to contracts, like really looking out for yourself and who you're getting involved with so that you're able to
Yeah,
have the
absolutely.
project unfold like you want it to.
Exactly. And if you do all those things at the beginning, odds are you're going to set yourself up for success. Whereas if you ignore all of that, you're going to be in one heck of a mess. And that's just very, very difficult, and nobody would rather be there. So that's really the key. Set
Yeah.
yourself up from the beginning for success.
Yeah, I feel like that applies for the large companies that are getting involved, like Whole Foods and EVgo have some sort of partnership. Like Whole Foods
Hmm.
want to look at for themselves, so does EVgo, but also the smaller mom and pop shops, like folks who want to not necessarily DIY, but have their own setup of what a charging station
Hmm.
looks like. All of this needs to be considered pretty equally to a point. Of course, they're different contracts. And one last question I have is like, okay, we can look back and take a lot of uh, lessons from what
Hmm.
we've gone through, but are there still any missing pieces that we're not super sure about when it comes to your work?
Um, so you know what? I think I would say that if there are, I guess, future challenges to that, it's a combination of a couple of things. I think when people embark on some of these projects, they don't necessarily think about future proofing, in the sense that they should prepare for more space and more deployment
Mm-hmm.
down the road. I'll give you one, like a concrete example of that. So I had somebody that came to me and was trying to put together a contract for a particular piece of property, and they expected that ultimately they would be installing 20 chargers at a particular location. But the landlord for right now did not want to do more than 4 or 5. And so the charging company was okay with that. They figured that they could actually make a profit out of this, or at least a little bit right now at the beginning, but down the road was really where they would start to cruise. okay, and really start to make some money from this. So they were willing to make the investment in this property. They were willing to enter into the contract with this particular property owner. So the question then came as, well, where are you putting your chargers? And so the client says, okay, I have these 5 spots right now here. Said, okay, great. Have you delineated where your space is going to be, the area that you're going to be leasing for this purpose? He said, yeah, where the 5 chargers are going. I said, no. Where are the other 15 going? So what do you mean? I said, well, right now you want to enter into a contract to lease the space that will cover you for, let's say, all 20, or give you the option to add that additional space. You want to make sure that there's a site diagram and probably even a survey that includes exactly where that is. And why do you want to put that there? Because why would you want a survey for something like that? You want it to be very clear, not only to you, but to your partner on the other side, the property owner, where your space is. Where is my space? So that way, you know what belongs to you. And the property owner knows, well, I can't put anybody else there because I already leased it to you, so to speak. Okay. So my recommendation was take that longer stretch of property right now as your leased area. And that way, when the time comes, we have language in the contract that already says you have the ability within your leased area to add or upgrade or so on and so forth the equipment that's currently there. You don't have to go back. You don't have to start arguing again. You just don't have whatever you build in. You're paying X number of whatever, or your revenue share is going to be this for the first charger up to the first 5, and then 6 through 10 will include that. So you put all of that in, and now you're kind of future-proofing that into the project. On the flip side of that, the property owner is thinking, well, I don't want to give up that longer stretch. I only want to give up the space for the 5. And so then that comes down to business terms and negotiating, but he wasn't thinking about future proofing, and neither was the property owner on the other side. Once they both began to think about it that way, now he could pitch him on why, property owner, this is something that's going to be worthwhile to you to give me the space now. Here's why this will be good for both of us. And so that changed all the dynamics. So I think a lot of times people just don't think about it. And then the other thing that I'm really seeing a lot of is that there is still a disconnect between all the people out there with just amazing ideas and smart people, and sometimes not so smart people, because I've seen both, and also a lack of funding in terms of the ability to put some of these projects together and to do this. I have spoken to so many people that had great ideas and wanted to do stuff and recognized that they need a lawyer. I need somebody to help me with my contracts, with raising money. I need to figure out how we're going to handle taxes, and I need to bring an accountant on board so we can figure out how we're going to deal with the revenue sharing and the splitting and how we account for it, and my business structure and all these other things. Like, they know intuitively they need to do these things, but then as soon as you say to them, okay, this stuff can be kind of expensive, this is what you got to do. This goes back to, what have I said to you? Spend your money up front so that you don't have the problem down the road. And you explain to them like what it's going to cost. There's often a disconnect in general between clients and the lawyers in terms of how much time something takes or what something costs. A lot of times people just don't understand that. And I think also when it comes to doing some of these projects, I am seeing a lot of people that are also not understanding it. Like, I know I need to get a lawyer involved, but they don't really completely understand. And then once they understand how much it costs, that's also another thing. So I think that's for sure a little bit more of a challenge, because that goes back to my comment a few minutes ago about the current economic and political crisis that we're in. And I think because of that, people are less reluctant right now to be spending money sometimes on some of these things, and they would prefer to wait. But some people also would prefer to wait, not necessarily because they don't want to spend the money, because they just don't know how it's going to work out. And that's also sometimes a mistake, because now you're putting yourself into a position where you finally decide, oh, well, now I'm for sure ready to do this. You've lost all this time because you didn't start doing the prep work ahead of time that in the long run will really save you money. So I think in terms of like things going on in the future, that would be another thing that, I would really like to start to see. I think as things change and as we have a better idea in terms of the way things are going to be going, I think people will be more apt to make some of those investments. And I think people are also starting to get, a lot more careful about where they're throwing or not throwing, but where they're placing their money and who they're placing it with. So, those are things that I think are, will have some sort of impact on the stuff that we're doing. But on the flip side of that, though, there's still plenty of people that are doing this. There's still plenty of people that are out there that are willing to do that. There are
Oh, yeah.
finance for it, and so on and so forth. So the people that are willing to, step out there, they're also going to be at a tremendous advantage over all these people that keep saying, I'll wait for that perfect opportunity, because you may never get the situation where it's perfect in every which way.
It's so true. I see so much opportunity to have this amenity built in when either things are being built or go build it back into that parking garage, because I feel like it really is going to pay off. It's going to be valuable to real estate.
Yeah.
It's going to be valuable to whoever's using that building or that site or whatever, because people are adopting EVs into their lives, and it's growing. So I agree. Like, waiting around for the perfect moment may never come. And those really successful in a lot of other industries took that risk, and they went ahead with it. And I think you have provided really valuable insight into not only the pre-installation phase that we covered in the last episode, but the post-installation phase of EV chargers, and how clearly understanding the legal and operational aspects is crucial for the success of this project. And you can navigate it. It's also, let's do it with some education, with some information to make sure that we are moving in the right direction and setting ourselves up for success. Because at this point, I'm like, how many excuses are there anymore to not have good EV charging infrastructure? It's about time.
I agree with you. It's about time that people just start doing it right. And that's what I try and encourage my clients to do all the time. If you're going to do this, do it right. Do it the right way. And those people that are willing to do it right, and they will be successful. If you go back and you look at any, technological leap, and, if you go back, for example, to the early days of the auto industry, how many car companies were there in the United States of America when it first got started? There were hundreds, I believe, of car companies, of people that were getting into this. Now we only have a few of them, right? You had a similar situation with the telecom industry. Go back to the old days of like Ma Bell. If you ever went back and you looked at that family tree, somebody once showed me this years ago, and they rolled it out on this massive piece of paper and all the different companies and everything else. And now you have only a handful of them. But even if you don't go to an industry like that, that's consolidated in an enormous way, if you think about any other technological revolutions, at the beginning, there's always a lot of people that do this. And there are people that do it well. There are people that do it poorly. But what ends up happening over time is that the people who do it poorly and who do their homework and invest their money in doing this the right way, and who do their homework and do their due diligence and work out their financing and think about the customer experience and whether or not it makes sense and what their reputations are going to look like, and they pull all these things into the mix and they do that the right way, those companies are going to survive and they're going to thrive. And on the flip of that, the companies that are willing to cut corners, or they're not willing to spend the money, or they think, we can just manage with that, who cares, what's the difference? That kind of attitude isn't going to work in the long run, and those companies are going to suffer. They'll disappear. They'll get, eaten up by other companies for pennies on the dollar because they weren't worth, what they were saying that they were. And so the people who do this right, yes, it will take you a little more time, but they will be the companies that we're going to be talking about down the road, saying, wow, look at this. Look at what these companies did and what they were able to accomplish.
Yeah, software and hardware is only part of the strategy. Great, get the things that work, but also, take this all into account. It's going to be really interesting to see how this plays out. Like you said, also with the federal incentives, with the legislation, how that is all influencing the market, and then what will come when that changes, and who will just be left standing. It's going to be really interesting to watch, and I hope it's not too dramatic, but it's
I hope. I agree with you. It's been very dramatic. I hope it's not going to be too dramatic. I think the one thing we know for sure is that no matter what, it will change, and then it's just going to be a matter of adjusting to whatever that new reality is going to be. But I think also the market in the industry is really pretty healthy. The number of EVs that are on the road keeps growing tremendously. There are more and more manufacturers that are getting in on this. Hyundai in particular is going to have the ability now to crank out EVs at an enormous rate. Their cars are becoming more and more popular. And, from people that I know that have done this, like, I won't go back. Like, once you do this, you won't go back. And so, I think there's for sure a market out there anyway. There's going to be millions of EVs on the road, no matter what happens. I don't see the sky falling anytime soon. I think it'll slow down a little bit. Okay, but the momentum is there. We've hit the tipping point where this technology is here. It's here to stay. And the people, again, it comes back to the people doing it right are the people that are, the people in companies are the ones that are going to make it.
Yeah, of course we started at zero, so those first numbers were astronomical, and now we've got the steady growth. So yeah,
of course, at some point it's got to slow down. It's got to slow down.
Yeah, but it's not decreasing. So to stay prepared and to have all the information and concrete examples of what not to do and what to do is really great. So I do really appreciate your time and your energy and your expertise in sharing it with us all here on the Out of Spec podcast, Jason.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure.
Listeners, I know everyone really enjoyed our last episode. So let us know what questions this sparked for you. If you've considered being a site host, what lessons are you taking away from this? Hopefully all of them. Let us know in the comments. Thank you again, everyone, for tuning in for another episode of the Out of Spec podcast. Really appreciate it. And drive safely. Stay charged. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.